What's up everybody, it's Rob from the Basement Bike Shop, back at it in a new basement with a new bike shop, and in this video we're going to go over the installation of a front brake on a BMX bike with a gyro. You know, when you have to run the front brake cable down the center of the stem bolt and out the bottom of the fork. And we'll be installing a U-brake, so your fork will need to have U-brake mounts. Now I don't normally run a front brake, I run what they call a dirt jumping setup, or at least that's what they used to call it. So I had to buy a bike for this and put it together, but we'll speed through that and get to the front brake. I will be releasing a full video of this assembly, going over what you should do if you mail order a bike or you buy a bike from a store where they don't have an experienced mechanic. If that sounds interesting to you, turn on those alerts so you don't miss it. Now let's get started. Now I'll usually do this whole installation upside down, but I'll turn the bike right side up through parts of it just so it's easier for you to follow. If you were going to leave the bike upside down, you could probably leave the front wheel off until after you get the cable ran. I know I have this bike stand that a lot of you might not have, but I'll put my bike between two storage bins like you see in this video, or I'll take two cinder blocks and put towels on them, put my tire between them. Alright, the first thing we're going to do is mount the brake. Now there are two arms that will mount crossed and two bolts. The brake arms also consist of springs and brake pads, but I'm talking enough, so we'll get to the installation. It's important to know which one goes in front and which one goes in back. You can see this one curves forward and this one curves backwards. So that one goes in back and the other one goes in front. And then the two bolts go through the middle of the springs and into the posts. Now I don't tighten them down all the way. I tighten them until they're almost snug, but the arm flops freely so that I can set the spring tension later. And since I put the tire on already, we're going to set the brake pad angle right away. Now with mountain bikes and road bikes, I like to angle my brake pads so they don't squeal, but when I set BMX brake pads, I set them flat to the rim because I want it to brake the same forward and backwards. To do this, I just loosen the nut on the back, and then I line the pad up with the rim and I hold the arm against it so that it stays in position. This is why I didn't set the spring tension right away. And then I just tighten the nut on the back. I do the same for the other side, and then I check to make sure that they're hitting in the correct spot and at the correct angle. Next we'll set the spring tension on the brake arms. We'll fine tune it later after we have the cable ran. To set tension, we're going to use a 13mm wrench to hold the spring, and then a 5mm Allen wrench to lock it into place. You don't need to put a lot of tension on the spring, and we're trying to make both of them match, but we're going to fine tune that later. For me, the key to dialing in brakes is to put the least amount of tension possible, but still have them return good. So with the least amount of tension on them, your brake pull is going to be very smooth and easy, but you still want it to return all the way and fairly quickly. And now the fun part. Running the cable down the center of the fork. Now we're going to flip the bike upside down for this. And as you can see, there's very little clearance between the tire and the fork on the other side, which is why we need to remove the front wheel. Remember that some bikes have lock washers that lock into the fork, so you have to make sure you get the peg and nut far enough away that you can get the lock washer out of the fork. With the tire removed, we're ready to run the cable. We're going to run it through the stem bolt first and out the fork. Now I like to run the cable and the housing all together. My cable kind of guides the housing through the fork. If later I find I need to cut the housing, I'll pull the cable out and then cut the housing and push it back through. But you can do it however you want to. Next, I'm going to hook the cable into my lever. I do this to measure the amount of slack on the handlebar side so that I know how much I need to pull through the cable guide on the bottom side, which is technically the top side right now. If you didn't put your cable through it, you can just hook the housing into the handlebar and then pull the right amount through. So this is where I think people have the most difficulty. As they try to run the cable out the bottom of the fork and through the guide. And it's just two sharp turns and it's kind of impossible to make. The trick is to pull out the correct amount of slack and then make a loop and then go up through the guide. And as you pull the slack out of the loop, it will just spring into place. After that, we'll put the front wheel back on so we can finish running our cable and setting our tension. Now, if your cable wasn't pre-cut, this is the point when you would cut your housing to the correct length. And if you ran your inner cable through the center of your housing, then make sure you pull that inner cable out of the housing before you cut it. Next, we'll loosen the nut on the other side, and then the bolt that nut's on has a hole through it, or it'll have a cable clamp on it. And we run the cable through it, and then we're going to hold tension on the springs with the cable pulled all the way through, leaving a little bit of gap in the brake pads for the amount of travel we want. And then we'll tighten it down and we'll test it. We're not testing how even the pull is from one side to the other. We're just testing how far the brake lever travels. We'll set the evenness with the spring tension later. So if your brake lever travels too far, then you want to pull more cable through and tighten it. And if your brakes are still like too tight, then let a little more cable out. And we can micro adjust it later too. Lastly, we're going to set spring tension. Now when you pull your brakes, both arms should move about the same amount. But if one's moving a lot and the other one's not moving much, or the brake pad is still against your rim, then we need to make an adjustment. We'll use our 13mm wrench and our 5mm Allen wrench. And we'll either put more tension on the side that's not moving, or take some tension off the side that's moving too much, until we can get them to pull evenly. Now, if it feels like your lever is really hard to pull, you can take a little bit of tension off each side. And if you pull your lever and your brake pads don't come away from your rim, or your lever doesn't return all the way back, but there's slack in your cable, you may need to add a little tension to each side. All that's left to do is clip the cable, put our little anti-fray nub on the end. And if you have an old school 1-inch threaded fork, the cable routing is going to be pretty much the same. And that about wraps it up for this video. Thanks for watching. If you like what you saw, hit that subscribe button and I'll keep those videos coming. I know I took a small break there, but I'm back at it now. If you have any questions or suggestions for future videos, you can comment below or you can send me a message. Thanks again.